Heidi Duffy, and I'm the National Young Rider Forum's facilitator.
Hi, I'm Tanya Fosdick and I'm Head of Research at Agility. So we're here today to talk about a project for the National Young Rider Forum. So do you want to give a few words about what it's all about?
Yes, National Young Rider Forum is a group of road safety professionals who came together in February 2019 from all sorts of different road safety groups, people like MCIA, MAG, Safer Roads from all over the country. And when we sat around the table and talked about the problem that we wanted to, which was young riders, it became clear that actually we didn't know an awful lot about the young riders. And so rather than sort of waste time and money coming up with something that might not work, we decided the very first thing we wanted to do was to try and understand who and what our young riders are. So we came up with a project brief, and the rest is history, because obviously you came forward and have completed the project for us. Brilliant.
Okay, and so what did we do? Well, the project was split into 5 different stages. So we had casualty analysis, where we could really help the forum understand what the problem is. An online survey out to young riders to understand their needs, attitudes and motivations. Then stage 3 was interviews, originally with focus groups, we'll come on to that in a bit, to delve more deeply to understand them some more. Part 4 was using deep learning to cluster the survey respondents and create a segmentation of different types of young rider. And then stage 5 was bringing this all together in a final report. So we definitely needed to be flexible throughout the project. The proposal was accepted pre-COVID, so we had to adapt some of our methodologies as we progressed. And we also encountered some recruitment difficulties. Young riders are not an easy group to find and engage with, which is perhaps why they present such a casualty problem. So what did we find? Well, the short answer is lots, and there is really far too much to go through today. But we're going to touch on some of the key findings and then encourage you to read the report. So let's start with the casualty analysis, where we looked at 16 to 24-year-old motorcycle casualties between 2014 and 2018. So we're not looking at pillion passengers here or other road users who were injured in collisions with them. We are just focusing on young riders who were injured. So give me 2 seconds whilst I share my screen, and fingers crossed this is now working. So in the 5 years we analysed, there were 30,862 young riders injured in Great Britain. Of these, 314 were killed, and a total of 8,076 were killed or seriously injured. And just in case we were thinking that in comparison to young drivers, this still isn't a problem, this chart shows the number of young people killed or seriously injured in Great Britain by age. So this is driver casualties only, but it is only at age 24 that the number of car drivers killed or seriously injured exceeds the number of young motorcyclists. Heidi, what were your immediate thoughts when you saw this chart?
Well, I was surprised and I was shocked. I feel this is the very first time that actually that comparison has been made. And it's clear to see that the young motorcyclist has got a serious problem here. If you ask somebody to think of a road safety project involving young drivers, it's really easy because there's been so much over the years. But if you ask the same person to come up with a road safety resource that was for young riders, there's been virtually none whatsoever. So this actually shows why the National Young Riders Forum came together, and why the project, including this first part, which was the casualty analysis, why we really wanted it to be done, because it clearly shows the scale of the problem here with young riders.
Yeah, absolutely. So just looking at who these young rider casualties were, so the majority were riding smaller machines with engines up to 125cc, and they were most commonly male. But not all casualties were the same though, and this is a common theme in this project. So for example, depending on age, between 22 and 40% were recorded as riding for work, and between 40 and 57% were commuting. So just to show that a little bit more clearly, this table shows the split of rider casualties by age and engine size. So a third were aged 16 to 18 years old on smaller machines. And across all 3 age groups, just under 80% were on motorcycles up to 125cc. Is this what you expected, Heidi?
Yeah, I think we all knew that we'd got a problem with youngsters on small bikes. But again, the surprise was the scale of the problem and the very young age of the riders. That's 9,745 injured young riders aged 16 to 18. So the first motorised journey of many of these teenagers on a busy road ended up them coming off, being injured, possibly going to hospital. And what a frightening experience for our young road users of the future. This shows we've got lots of work to do to prepare, guide and support them as young riders going forward. And that's a clear illustration, 79.4%, 24,495 young riders in those very young ages.
Absolutely. And just to kind of touch a little bit more on the collision circumstances, these are probably not of a surprise to many. Young riders tend to crash on urban roads and in fact tend to live in urban areas. But what's quite interesting here is that most of them, about 2/3, were near a junction, with the largest percentages, so 34 to 42% at T-junctions. And whilst they were near a junction, they were often travelling straight ahead and were in collisions with a car. So it's likely that the cars were emerging from those junctions into their path. And less than 20% of the young motorcyclists were involved in single vehicle collisions. So they are really, it's when they're interacting with other road users. So moving on to the survey, this was disseminated through the forum and its partners and was launched pre-pandemic. Now, Heidi did an amazing job at constantly pushing and getting partners to disseminate the survey link. But even with £50 Amazon vouchers as prize incentives, we only got 182 young motorcyclists to complete the survey. However, we still got some really interesting insights based on the questions we asked on a range of topics. So did you think it was going to be so difficult to find young riders and encourage them to participate?
No. To be honest, it would have been easier to find unicorns and do a survey with them, I thought, at one stage. I don't want anybody watching this to think that we didn't try every angle. We contacted every stakeholder, every organisation. We went through insurance companies who insure, a lot of young riders. We went through people that distribute young rider magazines. We went through all the usual, the CBT, the DVSA, and we reached out to thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of young riders. And you just couldn't believe that we just didn't get them coming to want to engage with us. However, the whole reason we're doing this is because other road safety professionals find it very difficult to engage with them. So in a way, it confirmed what we're actually looking at. They are a very difficult group to engage with. And even when you actually got them to sign up and do the survey, and certainly when we get to the focus groups, you got them to sign up, got them to agree a time, and then they didn't turn up, even though it was a virtual one, and they hadn't got to go anywhere. It was inside their own home. Yeah. However, you did actually, to be fair, 542 would have been a good sample survey. However, we were picky. We wanted the 16 to 24s, and as soon as they put in the qualifying question, obviously a lot of them got knocked out. We found as well that actually young riders have problems finding young riders. So it's not just down to people who want to sort of spread information to them. And one of the things that came out is that other young riders would like to get in contact with young riders. So if they're having problems using all the social networks that they've got, it's no wonder road safety professionals have a problem. But we got there in the end.
Absolutely. So what did we find? Well, as with the collision analysis, we found that young riders are a really diverse bunch. So in the survey, we had respondents from across the 16 to 24 year age range, riding both smaller and larger bikes. So these are just some of the insights we started to get. So from a road safety perspective, it was striking to see that a third purchased their bike secondhand. Where are they buying them from and in what condition? Kind of the immediate questions there. Interestingly, whilst the respondents stated that they rode for commuting, pleasure or errands, there were not high percentages of those riding for work. In fact, only 14% stated they did so every day. Now, we think there are two possible reasons why this might be lower than perhaps expected. Firstly, this survey was targeted at young riders, And it might be that those young riders who happen to ride a motorcyclist for work don't identify themselves as motorcyclists. It's just a function of their job. Secondly, the survey was conducted during the first COVID lockdown, so it could be that journey purpose reflected that moment when travel was very much limited. Motivations for riding varied. There were some who had a general interest in motorcycling, and it was really common within their family to have a bike. There were others who were looking for practical transport solutions. So Heidi, there's probably a few points on this slide that the forum will want to follow up.
Yeah, I feel this slide was the very first slide and that got into really what we want to know about young riders. So I found it really interesting. It was good to see that the motorcycle family influence was there. And obviously that's really good in that motorcyclists who have ridden bikes for years are bringing on the next generation of motorcyclists, so that's great. It's good to see that a third of the young riders went to a motorcycle retailer. There they would get proper advice about which bike suited them, proper support, etc. So it was really good to see that, you know, they were going to the retail shops. The slide shows the opportunities with schools and colleges and other educational establishments. It's difficult going into a large college, but if you've got a number there who are riding small bikes, then this shows that it is worth the effort in actually going in and setting up a forum and speaking to them. The second, the buying the bike second hand leads me to concerns about what state was the bike in, you know, did the young rider know how to maintain it? And this is something that one of our forum members, South Yorkshire Safe Roads, have recently done a series of maintenance films for YouTube. But this is something we could expand upon, in that we could, once normality comes back, we could look at doing some young rider hubs and bike maintenance being part of it, because the basic bike maintenance of changing a light or checking a battery is quite simple, and it comes out from this that there is a need for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So another area that it looks like there is some need for is about PPE, and we also looked at compulsory basic training. So looking at PPE, the respondents reported wearing gloves, be they leather or textile, but there was a real mix on whether they wore any other protective clothing. There were some worrying percentages of respondents who admitted to wearing inappropriate clothing, with 70% of them saying that they sometimes wear tracksuits and 49% sometimes wearing trainers. There was also a real mix of respondents who wanted the compulsory basic training to be supported with pre-learning, hazard perception, a theory test, or follow-up support. They were also asked where they go for information about riding, and aside from heading online, they turn to their motorcycle trainers. So I think there's lots here for you, Heidi, to get your teeth into, and lots that's kind of interrelated as well.
Yeah, again, it was great to see that the young rider, having found an instructor to go and learn to ride the small bike and take the test, then saw them as somebody that they could seek advice from. With my other hat, the Shiny Side Up, we do a lot of local work with riding schools, and they are a great source of knowledge and support. So that is something we'll be looking at. I am concerned about PPE, but we've got to listen to what the young riders are telling us. We know, and we've seen all the photographs, which obviously, you know, can be quite horrific when they do hit the road. We can see the damage that's caused if they are wearing tracksuit bottoms, if they're not wearing boots and not wearing gloves. You know, the injuries are akin to third-degree burns. But we don't want to shock and frighten them by showing them images like that, because you and I both know that that doesn't really work. We've got to look at what comments they've made about the style, how it looks, how it wears, and what attracts them to it, because at that age they are picking clothes, etc., which suits their individual style, and the PPE shouldn't be any different really. It should fit in with how they want to look. The added bonuses, it will give them protection. So yeah, some really good information there, and yes, something we can get our teeth into.
Brilliant. So there was lots of other bits and pieces in the survey, which was all in the report, but we took all of the survey data, and my very clever colleague, Craig, easy for me to say, used a deep learning technique to cluster respondents into segments. using what's known as a neural network. So it meant that we could group the respondents without introducing our own biases. And so we ended up with 13 different segments. So what we then did was manually grouped these, because actually they did share some common characteristics. And about a quarter fell into what we called the Experienced Riders group. So these were likely to have completed their two-part test, and their experience brought quite a level of confidence with them, you know, their own riding. And that they also felt that they were less likely to want further support. Now, the reason why there are 4 segments kind of below this group is that actually some of these behave much more safely than others. Mm-hmm. Another quarter are the inexperienced riders. So they may have only completed the CBT, but that's due to age. They do see themselves as riders, albeit not very confident ones. These are probably the ones who are from those motorcycling families and are going to want to go on to do the two-part test and get a bigger bike in the future. Now, they differ from the third of respondents, who are inexperienced car aspirants. So taking the term from the Simon Christmas work on motorcyclists from those years ago, these are inexperienced riders, but they are waiting to get a car. So interestingly, these are the least likely to wear PPE, aside from cluster 7, which represents about 8% of our respondents. These are pleasure riders who are inexperienced. They don't wear PPE, and they engage in some unsafe behaviours. I have an image of this character in my head. I think we kind of can guess who they are, what they look like. So Heidi, how useful do you think this sort of segmentation will be for the forum? And you know, the work seems to have shown quite clearly that young riders can't all be treated the same.
I think it's a really clever technique, and it brings a new dynamic to the National Young Rider Forum and the report itself. It answers one of the questions: are all young riders the same? No. Would one road safety intervention project or whatever suit them all? No. And what it does enable us to do is to just focus on one of the groups, and it tells us a lot about that group. It allows us to combine some of the groups, and obviously it tells us which groups really it's going to be a waste of our time actually trying to engage with them. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, and certainly some of the groups will be easier to target than others, I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely, most definitely. Right, so moving on to the interviews, the original plan was to bring young motorcyclists together in a room to delve deeper into their thoughts and experiences about a range of topics, including motivations and barriers, where they go for support, other road users, and protective clothing. The idea was to kind of expand on what we'd learned from the surveys. Obviously, with COVID-19, face-to-face focus groups were most definitely not possible, so we moved to using Zoom. But availability became a bit of an issue, and it soon became apparent that we would need to conduct individual or paired interviews rather than having those group dynamics that we'd hoped for. However, it did provide each participant with much more time to share their views, and we did get some really good insights. We did only get 15 participants, despite Heidi and my colleague Ammon chasing everyone we could get in contact with. We also extended the deadline for participation, and we introduced another £50 Amazon voucher prize draw. So what we do need to emphasise here is that these findings are only based on the 15 we spoke to. They were self-selecting, and we obviously don't know about those we didn't get to speak to. But there were still some interesting findings. So we asked a range of questions, but some of the most interesting sets of responses is about sources of support. So they often go to experienced riders they know, such as family members. They'd also go to their friends, their trainer, talking about the trainers again, local mechanic and or dealership. And some say that they even attend advanced training groups and have formed a kind of a support network to be able to get that help that they require. A couple of the participants believe that there is no replacement for going out and riding and learning from your own mistakes and reflecting on what goes wrong. But it just depends how badly it does go wrong when it does. Some mention they use online resources such as YouTube, so it's interesting that South Yorkshire are using that medium. Interestingly, there were some mixed feelings on online resources aimed at young people. So some of the participants felt that there isn't much out there at all, whereas others stated there is plenty of information out there, you just need to find it. So again, Heidi, what are the implications for the forum regarding these insights?
Yeah, I think this is really where the National Young Rider Forum can bring value to how information is got across to young riders, what's available. Thinking perhaps doing a gap analysis. Some of the riders said there was a lot out there, and some of the riders said there wasn't much out there. So perhaps finding out exactly what is out there, what does it deliver, what is the quality, and to see where we can add value by coming up with, you know, something new. The comment about one stop, you know, somewhere where they can go for everything. I think one of them mentioned about route maps and that sort of thing. We've already talked about bike maintenance. We've already talked about PPE. So I think there's definitely some scope towards looking at providing something, whether it's the website, which we've already got, the National Young Rider, and expanding that, and perhaps having a working group of the young riders who influence what the content is, or perhaps designing an app. You know, I know a lot of us now have got a lot of apps on our phones, but if it was one specific app which covered all those areas that we've learned from this report, then certainly worth consideration. So yeah, very interesting.
Great. So we also asked the interviewees about CBT and whether or not it should include a theory test or hazard perception training. Now, there's lots of information on this slide with these direct quotes shown here, but the upshot is that there were quite mixed feelings about these additions to CBT potentially. So some were quite strong in the fact that they felt that it was dangerous for people to be able to go out without a theory test, and that actually it should be the same process as for learning to drive a car. Others felt that it should be a little bit more informal and not be a pass or fail process, but that there was room for some enhancements. Some also felt that adding more to CBT would put young people off, and that it isn't actually about teaching you to ride. You learn to ride with on-road experience instead. So lots of kind of mixed ideas here. Do you see opportunities for working with DVSA around these findings? You know, I suppose Ride Free does fill some of these gaps because it's not compulsory and doesn't come with that kind of pass or fail that they were worried about.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a bit uneasy that to drive a car, you've got to have X amount of hours of driving and obviously a mandatory hazard perception and theory test. And then for your riders, you know, sort of one day, and they're out there. And I think that's always made me a bit uneasy because I do believe two wheels is, you know, you can be more vulnerable certainly than four. There's a great opportunity here to work with the DVSA. Ride Free came into a meeting recently and gave us an overview of it, and it's looking really exciting. Sadly, lockdown free, everything is closed at the moment, the bike training schools, the testing stations, etc. So I think we're all waiting for that magic day when things start to get back to some sort of normality. And yeah, we'll be meeting with Chris Parr and the team at DVSA to see where we can work together. But there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. Obviously, some of the riders are really encouraged about wanting a little bit extra, whether it's mandatory or not, or certainly some theories, some hazard perception, and Ride Free provides it as far as we can see. So yeah, happy to work together going forward.
Brilliant. So just to finish up on the interviews, we used the opportunity to understand a little bit more about that protective clothing that we started to see in the survey responses. So this does shed some light on those initial responses. So most of the participants we spoke to stated that they have all the protective gear and they wear it all or most of the time. Now, a small handful stated that they find it difficult to wear all the gear during the summer months when they prefer to wear jeans and trainers. And actually some stated that they only wear the full protective gear if they're doing a long journey. So we asked them what the barriers were for wearing protective clothing, and they stated the expense, appearance, inconvenience, and actually the protective clothing is not really very easily accessible. It was interesting that a couple of the females mentioned how it is difficult to find protective clothing for women that actually fits and is not all pink. So what do you think the forum could do to promote PPE wearing?
I think there's a lot we can do. It would be great on local level if some of the PPE that's currently residing in wardrobes and cupboards, having not been used for a long time, usually because the rider has put a bit of weight on during lockdown. It'd be great to see that recycled, and young riders who are just starting out have the opportunity to be matched with that PPE and get it free of charge. The other thing, with a third of the riders buying bikes from retailers, it would be great to see a subsidised scheme, so that somebody buying a bike, working with a safer roads group or partnership, could buy the whole PPE bit and at a much reduced cost, because cost is definitely an issue here. But these are young people, and you've got to look good, you've got to look the part, and it's quite fair enough and reasonable that they expect something to fit. They expect to look okay in it and look nice, and not like the Michelin Man, and like the young lady that said her trousers squeaked when she walked along. It's not something you want as a teenager, is it, to have squeaky trousers? And everything being girly and very pink, that's not on really, is it? So there's some great opportunities to perhaps work with some design students. Let the young people design something that they would find acceptable to wear. Let's look at subsidised, let's look at recycling, and let's not look at scare tactics. Let's not, go down the road of the old adverts showing everybody sort of in a right mess sort of thing. Let's try and embrace all that's good about PPE and actually get it to be appealing to riders in its own right, and then hopefully an increased wearing of it will follow.
Great, yeah, social norms, etc. So, just to kind of finish up from my point of view, the report itself brings together all of the findings into some quite concrete conclusions. But what we've touched on today are some of the insights gained, and these do link back to the collision analysis. We feel that it's really key to not think about the young rider as being one person with a defined set of characteristics. Their experience, attitudes, motivations, aspirations and behaviour all differ, and this needs to be considered when designing and delivering interventions. And they're also a disparate group. Accessing them can be really difficult, and this will influence how they're targeted in interventions. So we've actually got quite a long list of recommendations for Heidi and her colleagues. So I'm going to hand over to Heidi now to kind of talk about what next for the forum and where the priorities lie for you.
Well, first, the report is at the moment with the Department for Transport, and obviously we're hoping that they're going to be happy with the report and they will take on board some of the recommendations, because obviously they are the lead. We've got a meeting of the working group. We've already set a working group up, and at that working group we'll be looking at all the recommendations and going through each one to find out which ones that we can take on board straight away and put into action, which ones perhaps will need to be joined together and will provide tasks for us to go and progress. And each of the forum members will obviously have access to the report, and they can use the recommendations in their local interventions, because National Young Rider is great. It brings a lot of people together, but it doesn't stop individual road safety professionals if they've already got a project that they've started, and this will bring hopefully to support to what they're already doing. So yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. This research project, is now, in a way, we need another project to look at the research project, because it's brought forth so much valuable information that we can use going forward. So yeah, exciting times, working groups, distributing the report so other people can see it, and setting up good discussion forums about it to see how we can put these ideas into actions.
Absolutely, great. So before we finish up, where can people access the report?
Yes, well, before we just get onto that bit, obviously, I really would like to thank Agilicis for all their hard work, the whole team. I know that they've all been involved. For the patients, we never expected when we set out that there'd be a pandemic that would land in the middle of it, but we kept on going, and the communication between us all, you know, I've really enjoyed it, and it's been great. We've never, if we've had down days, we've lifted each other, and at the end of it, I think we've got really something very valuable. So thank you very much for you and the team. Thank you also for the Department for Transport. They had the faith in what they saw in National Young Rider. We were just setting out the trust and faith in us to actually do this project and deliver it, and hopefully they're happy with it. But without their grant funding, obviously, we wouldn't have been able to go forth with it. We are looking for people to join the National Young Rider. We're not centrally funded. Budget, like all road safety projects, is difficult. And so the report will be on the National Young Rider website, which you can see the link to on the slide now. And you'll be able to have a read of it there. My contact details are on there as well, direct email. So if anybody's interested in joining the National Young Rider or contributing any funds, because obviously a lot of these recommendations now need funding into real projects, or just having a chat about young riders, because the bonus is that perhaps all areas of the country have got a small problem, but between us, if we all join together, we can put a lot of really good actions together to look at this big problem, because this is what this presentation has shown and this report has shown. That over 30,000 casualties young riders is a problem that needs looking at very seriously. So thank you.
And yes, on that note then, let's thank you all for listening, and yes, please do come back to us with any questions. I hope you join the forum and find it really useful.